Please welcome the President and CEO of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, Joel R. Johnson.
Hello, hello, and I'm going to say it's still the morning. So good morning to everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had a nice little break and you were able to stretch your legs, recharge a bit. I actually want to take a moment to give a shout out to endangered for working on our recharging stations and enabling us to power your devices while you take a break. So we are in, of course, the second and last day here of Capitol Hill Ocean Week's conference. I want to thank you all for using your hashtag CHOW 2024 to share your experiences and amplify the incredible conversations that we've had in the last day and especially this morning here at CHOW. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and the Walton Family Foundation for sponsoring our next really important session, Leaders at the Helm of Climate-Ready Fisheries. Our panelists this morning will provide their insights on the need to accelerate and advance climate information, governance for fisheries and aquaculture. Fisheries management and fishing communities really come together and have to be adaptable in this particular moment as they build their resilience to a changing climate. And they are responding to ocean conditions while having to also foster a deep sense of equity and inclusion, especially of local communities. So there are quite a lot of investments taking place across the entire marine sector, from fishing fleets to gears to technologies, waterfronts, ports, even our marine workforce. All of these are essential to a thriving blue economy, an economy that everyone must be able to share in equally. Leaders are driving sustainable climate-ready fisheries to navigate these changing ocean conditions, manage a lot of the risk and some of the uncertainty that's out there, and to help reshape these governance systems. With that in mind, I am very pleased to introduce to you the moderator for today's discussion, Janet Coit. Janet Coit is the Assistant Administrator for NOAA Fisheries. She leads the agency in its mission to ensure the sustainability of U.S. fisheries, restore coastal and marine habitats, and recover protected marine species. Ultimately, her goals at NOAA Fisheries are to grow and modernize the surveys and that important science that underpin all of the management of fisheries and marine mammals so that we can learn from the diverse perspectives of those communities across our nation to support climate-ready fisheries and a very strong, sustainable seafood sector. Please welcome to the stage, Janet Coit.
Hello, I'm so pleased to be here today at CHOW and to facilitate a conversation with some inspirational leaders from around the country. For those of you who aren't familiar with NOAA Fisheries, and I bet you are, but our role is nothing less than managing living marine resources in all of our federal waters, which are largely 300 to 200 miles offshore. We work closely with partners like you and with regional bodies and states to make sure that we have productive and sustainable fisheries, healthy ecosystems, protect marine mammals, and that we have safe sources of seafood, which of course many of our coastal communities and cultures are reliant on. I don't need to convince anyone at CHOW about how important the ocean is, nor that we're facing unprecedented ecosystem changes as a result of climate change. Our fisheries are so important to cultural heritage, sustenance, our economy, our blue economy, and we're all grappling in different ways with how we change the management regime and look to create sustainability while confronting climate change. The changing conditions in our oceans are, I first learned about from the fishermen I know, but are stark, and we're devoting our science. NOAA Fisheries, we have a climate and ecosystem fisheries initiative, a national seafood strategy, an equity and environmental justice strategy, and many of our regulations and initiatives are now being retooled to focus on how do we confront and understand the changes associated with climate change and continue to work to support community resilience and the seafood and diversity within the oceans. So I'm not going to go into any further steps that we're taking at NOAA Fisheries because we all know that no federal agency can do this alone, and that the engagement and understanding of unique communities and fisheries is critical, and that people are often more motivated by what they see their friends, neighbors, or colleagues doing than what they're being told to do by government. So we have these leaders in very different spheres here, and during the next hour, we're going to cover a lot of ground. Our panelists are from all different parts of the country, and I think they are all different examples of what we call servant leadership or community-driven leadership in the nation. So I'm going to start with an introduction and a specific question to each of our panelists, hopefully get through 2 more rounds of questions, and then I'm encouraging all of you to put questions forward, and so I can get to your questions. And then at the end, we're going to have one of our rising leaders, youth leaders, come out and give her reflections on our panel. So let me start. I'm going to start with you, Herb. Herb Lee Jr. is the president and CEO of the Pacific American Foundation, which is a leading nonprofit in the development and training of rigorous culture-based education programs for both Native Hawaiians and non-Hawaiian students. A Native Hawaiian himself, Herb is also one of the founders of the Waikaluak Loko Fish Pond Preservation Society, whose mission is education through the protection, preservation, restoration, and perpetual stewardship of an ancient cultural resource. So Herb, you're a leader on many fronts, from preserving cultural heritage to working to alleviate food insecurity. Could you share a bit about what traditional fish ponds are, their significance historically and into the future, and talk about the focus of your work and the challenges posed by climate change?
Sure, thank you. Aloha, everybody. Can I get an aloha back?
Aloha.
Nice. Our elders have taught us that the word ha in aloha means breath. And when aloha is the character of the breath. So when we share ha, we're sharing aloha. That's level 1. And then we'll be lucky that in our lifetime that we can understand the 150 levels of what aloha means. And hopefully I can share some of those levels in my journey and in my talk today. Hawaii is the most isolated landmass on the planet. And for 1,000 years, they were able to develop a very sophisticated land management system, which included the construction of what we call now Native Hawaiian, ancient Hawaiian fish ponds. The first ones were built about 800 years ago. And today, in the 21st century, 90% of them are gone. There are over 500 of these that were built on the 6 major Hawaiian islands. If you think about it this way, from the transition from being a hunter and gatherer going out into the open ocean to catch fish and protein to feed, they say by the time the first Western contact was made in the late 1700s, there were about 1 million Native Hawaiians that were already living there. And to now, 90% of the ponds are done. They were totally self-sufficient. And today, we are over 80% and 90% of our food and energy does not come from Hawaii anymore. 65% of all of the fish that we consume or buy in our stores doesn't come from Hawaii anymore. So we are at a very important precipice in terms of understanding how we can bring back some of these technologies. And what I want to share with you is this slide. The fish ponds were developed in a way and engineered in a way. My pond is 400 years old. I've been working on it for 30 years now. And there's no manuals. We had to sort of refigure these things out. But this slide tells you that the Hawaiian engineering of fish ponds were 100 times more efficient than Mother Nature. and they still are the case. So we have, in the 21st century, there are about 40 of us now. In 1995, when I started this, there were only 2 of us. But now there are about 40 of us left that are beginning to try to inspire our communities again. If I asked, 30 years ago, if I asked people in Hawaii, do you know anything about Hawaiian fish ponds? And most people wouldn't say no. And now, 30 years later, I'm happy to say that when I go and speak and people come to our pond and I ask the group, how many of you have been to an ancient Hawaiian fish pond? And 60 to 70% of the hands go up. And that is part of what I call aloha aina, really understanding the love and connection to places in which we live that sustain us. The word aina is that which feeds, and that's going to be a very center part of our restoration process and our education programs that I want to share going forward. This next picture that I want to share is basically where we're located. We're on the island of Oahu. We're on the north side. Honolulu is on the south side. And we're in one of the largest embayments in the Pacific Ocean called Kaneohe Bay. And we own 2 fish ponds, one 11 acres and one 2 acres. The largest ponds were up to 700 acres in size. There were amazing feats of Hawaiian engineering, and we hope that in the next 30 years that we can begin to feed our communities again. So look forward to the discussion and learning from all of you. Aloha.
Thank you so much. Sarah Schumann fishes in Rhode Island and in Alaska and is the director of the Fishery-Friendly Climate Action Campaign. She's also on NOAA's Marine Fisheries Advisory Committee, and I've known her for a very long time. To Sarah, earning the title of commercial fisherman means a lot more than just catching fish. It means standing up for the ecosystems that produce wild seafood and standing with the communities who depend on them. In her current work as a fishing community organizer, Sarah is leading a coalition of fishermen who want to be in the driver's seat, or the captain's chair, when it comes to decarbonizing our fishing fleet. This is something you don't always hear about when it comes to climate change and fisheries. So Sarah, when you're talking about decarbonizing the fleet, what does that mean? Where are we currently? And what will it take to move the needle, to move us forward?
Thanks, Janet, and thank you, everyone, for your interest in being here today. Small correction, the Fishery-Friendly Climate Action Campaign is not actually a coalition. A coalition is where groups or entities or individuals sort of pool their collective resources and their power and vest a representative with the authority to speak to others on their behalf. This is an inside-out model in which rests on sort of peer learning and community building, in which I am compiling resources and then distributing those resources, connections, and information outward to communities to empower them to speak with their own voices. We value the diversity. We realize there are multiple different perspectives which sometimes compete and sometimes complement each other, and all are valid and valuable and need to be heard. The Fishery-Friendly Climate Action Campaign launched in 2022. It was incubated in collaboration with 2 Southern New England fisheries organizations, the Commercial Fisheries Center of Rhode Island and the Massachusetts Fishermen's Partnership, and since then has grown to incorporate participation from Alaska, the West Coast, and New England. Its mission is to use peer learning and community building to unleash a groundswell of leadership by the commercial fishing industry to tackle the root causes of climate change at both the macro level, or the economy or society-wide level, as well as the micro level, focusing on our own businesses. And that's where the transition to a low-carbon fishing fleet project originated. It actually started in 2022 when we were experiencing record-high fuel prices, which was really putting a damper on a lot of fishing businesses' ability to survive and thrive. At the same time, we heard that Congress was getting serious about passing comprehensive climate legislation. And so we started plotting behind the scenes about how to take advantage of that opportunity to see how we could maybe participate in the energy transition while also saving ourselves money and building our energy resilience for the future. When the Inflation Reduction Act came out in mid-2022 and set in motion $369 billion of federal funding to support an energy transition in every corner of the American economy, we got really excited and started looking at places within that spending package that we could potentially ask to carve out some funding that would support innovation and adoption of low-carbon fishing systems to power our own vessels. But we didn't really know what that looked like in practice. So in the last year and a half, I and 4 other fishermen researchers, all working fishermen or members of fishing families, have fanned out across Alaska, the West Coast, and New England to interview 150 fishing vessel owners about their hopes, dreams, and fears for a low-carbon future for their vessels, as well as a couple dozen key informants, including port managers, technical assistance providers, and administrators of several existing state and federal incentive programs that could theoretically be leveraged for this purpose. And what we have learned is that there are several really hard to overcome challenges that are not entirely unique to the fishing industry, but are certainly front and center for our industry. We're a very hard to decarbonize sector. The whole maritime sector generally is, but in contrast to a lot of other, larger maritime sectors, we're very dispersed. A lot of us are small businesses. We are very different from one another, different gear types, different trip lengths, different geographies, different access to shoreside infrastructure. There won't be any sort of one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to decarbonizing the fishing fleet, and we need a menu of solutions that includes everything from sort of low-hanging fruit efficiency measures that will not eliminate dependence on fossil fuels, but will enable us to reduce that dependence, so reduce our fuel consumption, our fuel bills, and our emissions of greenhouse gases. And then ultimately, thinking ahead to fuel switching, what can be everything from electrifying vessels to replacing fossil diesel with biomass-based diesel like biodiesel or renewable diesel, or some of the e-fuels or electrically produced fuels like hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol. The solutions really need to span 5 different buckets. Research and development of new technologies that includes both owners of fishing vessels and the people in our ports who service those vessels. Pilot projects and demonstrations so that we can be involved in working out the kinks and showing what works and what doesn't, and learning from mistakes as well as successes. Knowledge transfer. Both to fishing vessel owners so that they can understand what will work on different vessels and in different contexts, and ultimately think about adopting it, as well as knowledge transfer to the people, the technicians in our ports who are going to need to service these complex systems as they begin to roll out. We definitely need financial incentives, as well as technical assistance to help us access those incentives. And we need a coupled shoreside infrastructure, which could include charging stations, make-ready infrastructure in the local grids to put more power to those charging stations, or supply chains for alternative fuels. Having identified all of this, our key strategy now is to work on building the capacity of the fishing industry to take the lead in our business's own energy transition, while simultaneously cultivating readiness on the government side to honor and support the industry's leadership through support of enabling policies and programs, and provision of resources and risk reduction. And I want to thank NOAA Fisheries and Janet for the invitation to be here today on this panel, because this is a powerful symbol of honoring the fishing industry's leadership on this issue.
Thank you, Sarah. Switching gear, literally, I am now introducing Rob Martin, he's been in the commercially fishing off the waters of Cape Cod for more than 40 years. He has experience across a number of fisheries, but primary focus on lobster. Rob is a creative thinker. He has a history of collaboration with research and conservation organizations, and the basis for his current work as a contractor in support of NOAA Fisheries Gear Team is part of Rob's work with us to use the best available science to reduce interactions between pot trap fisheries and large whales and other creatures. And changing ocean temperatures have changed where prey and where whales like endangered North Atlantic right whales are, and increasingly compelling us to take more measures to mitigate risk, including entanglement in fishing gear. So Rob, you have been a strong voice in support of on-demand fishing gear and other innovations. Can you walk us through, briefly, some of these gear types and how they can reduce entanglement with animals like whales and turtles? Yeah, and if you can touch on it, or maybe we'll get back to it, how some of the changes in the ecosystems are affecting the lobster sector.
Hey, great, and thanks to be here. Thanks, Janet. And I could be here for 3 hours talking, but I got to short and sweet. So bring me here. I've been fishing on my own now since 1980, and that's all I ever wanted to do, go lobstering. Boom, that's what I did. I've gone scalloping, mobile gear, ground fish. I've gone long lining, and up until about 10 years ago, we were faced with a closure up in the Northeast Massachusetts restricted area, which was about just over 3,000 square nautical miles. It wasn't vertical, it was a trap pot closure to protect the North Atlantic right whale. So my better half, Laurie, was reading all this stuff, and I was just like, I don't want nothing to do, I'm just angry, blah, 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 blah. So she's the smart one, so she got a handful of us together. We started resurrecting an old organization. We came up with some help from an individual who thought about this, so we ended up perfecting it. Was reduced breaking strength from a paper by the New England Aquarium, Amy Knowlton, with 1,700 pounds. So then we took it from there. We did best available science. We started pounding the pavement, knocking on doors. And our rope company was Nova Braid. We did the sleeve, and it broke at 1,700, so we were willing to try to get back into a closed area with best available science, with 10 years of whale sightings, with strong support from Scott Krause to let us get back in there fishing to open up this area to test this gear. And that never happened, so the next thing was, how do we get back fishing? I fished, that was 100% of my income, was fishing, 12 months. And my daughter was getting ready to go to college the following year. So by chance, my nephew was interning at a company in Massachusetts called Edge Tech. They've been around for a long time. They do underwater robotics, survey stuff, acoustic gear, and blah, blah, blah. So Laurie called. So Laurie and my friend Mike Lane, who's been doing this, one of the original guys, they went down and talked to Edge Tech. Mike said, we want something like this. So he basically helped them design a unit, and we had a bunch of us just asking questions. So we started testing this stuff back in 2017. So we took it from there, and the rule was a closed area was trap pot fishing. No, I don't care what you had, you can't get back in there. So we were at the TRT. Laurie put something forward, talked to try to change the law to, instead of trap pot, because it's basically a vertical line issue up and down in the water column. So it was changed to a vertical line rule. So hence a few years later, we've been working on this gear, met other rope manufacturer companies. There's a stowed rope and the lift bag system. And I think 4 of us started testing this gear from inshore to offshore Area 3. And then Mike's here and Mark Colombo's here who fished Area 3. And we were all testing this gear. So we're kind of the guinea pigs. This is what's working, this is not what's working. Met with a lot of resistance, still a lot of resistance. Hence, we were going forward then. I had a chance to work for NOAA as an affiliate at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, which I'm now at Garfo, and just doing a bunch of this cool stuff. But I was already doing this stuff from reduced breaking strength to on demand. And I'm like, if this stuff works, and I started with the reduced breaking strength, I got to see for myself. Because I'm not going to tell somebody, oh, you got to use this, if it's just, I can't do it. So I ended up changing all my vertical lines over back in 2016 with reduced breaking strength before the final rule came into effect in 2021. So I was already doing this, and with the color ropes I was using. So that just led me forward into that, and we've been through the Science Center, we tried to get guys fishing who were affected by a closure. And the first closure was the Great South Channel in 1997. Mine was in 2014. Then there's the South Island restricted area, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, in Area 2, Area 3 overlap. And there's a closure offshore in Maine from Gulf of Maine and abuts Area 3, but you can kind of fish around it. So we've been testing this gear, modifications, and a lot of resistance, still a lot of resistance, but guys who wanted to go fishing had the opportunity to go. Canada jumped on board with some of the stuff we were doing. And the snow crab fishery up there went back into the Gulf because they had a 2016-17 unusual mortality event with a lot of right whale deaths in fishing gear. And they started their season, I think, a little bit earlier this year. They didn't have to use the on-demand gear, and they finished with their quota. But a couple years ago, they were landing, guys were trained how to do it. They were in the closure fishing, landing over 1 million pounds of snow crab, which otherwise they weren't able to go. And I met some really cool snow crab guys, good relationships with them, along with CWF up there who has their gear cache. So, and the Science Center has a gear cache, gear lending library. Any fisherman is interested, wants to use it. They train you. I'd be probably one of the guys training, or any issues. We go from Maine to Ocean City, Maryland, we get guys fishing the gear. And 2 years ago, we finally got an EFP to go fish in the closure, the Mass Restricted Area closure. It came through a few days before it ended, but the last 2 years, there's been a bunch of us fishing in Mass Restricted Area federal waters and Area 2-3 federal waters, along with 2 years ago, a couple guys went into state waters in Massachusetts, were able to fish. Usually that time of year, the price is really high. You're not fishing a lot of gear. They had 10 units to fish, so they were either making 20, 30 pot trawls up. And I always say, if you're not affected by it, don't worry about it. But and you can't have a government entity, state entity, a manufacturer, or whoever, in a crowd like this with fishermen come, you got to try this. They'd be like, no way, Jose. So usually it's, once we're doing it, we get a little success story going. So a bunch of us have been fishing, and it's, how's the gear going? How can I get into that? Or it started out with 4 of us. It was 53 of us now on the EFP. We're actually fishing the gear in closed areas. It's up to, the EFP is going to be up to 100, then up to 200 boats to go fishing. But we always say it's a tool in your toolbox for you to go if you are affected by either future mitigations or right now if you're affected. And if you don't want to go, don't go. But it's been a really cool ride. And there is a little demo trap at the IFAW booth out front. That's one of the systems. It's a lift bag system by Smelts.
I'm going to cut you off. So go to the demo booth,
Yep.
Hear more about that system and others. And Rob, I'm going to get back to you in round 2.
No problem.
Okay.
I talk too much.
You're awesome. Okay. Carrie Marhefka is the co-founder of Abundant Seafood, one of the first community-supported fishery programs in the U.S. She and her husband, a second-generation commercial fisherman, also have 2 retail seafood markets in the Charleston area. Carrie worked for the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council until 2007 and is currently a council member. Carrie, in your current role in the council, you've been a voice for small-scale fisheries and also an active participant in the East Coast climate change scenario planning, which we appreciate. What does that scenario planning process look like? Who's involved? How will it mitigate the impacts of climate change or help build resilience? And how does your work at Abundant Seafood fit into all that?
Sure. First, I would like to, on behalf of your wife, thank you as the also better half of a commercial fisherman. We all know the smarter half. There you go. There you go. So thank you for the question. Yeah, I have 2 interesting roles in which, as a council member, I'm concerned about, are we seeing expansion of fish into regions because of climate change, or are we seeing, them shrink? We're trying to figure that out. As everyone here knows, you cannot put a fence in the ocean. So as these fish move, as managers, it's really complicated to figure out what we're going to do in the future with these. As someone who relies on those fish for a living, it's even more complicated because we're seeing the species that we have access to change all the time, and we may not have the ability to catch if we don't have the permit for that species. We really need to be more adaptable as commercial fishermen than we have ever been. One of the ways that my family handled that was by starting a community-supported fishery and really changing the model of what used to be traditionally in our area, in the southeast at least. You sort of came in, you unloaded all your fish to a wholesaler. They sent the fish, whether it was to Baltimore, or New York, or even Canada, and then it would somehow make its way back to where you were. And my husband and I would be sitting at a restaurant before we sold our own fish, and we would be, eating, say, a snapper, and the server would tell you that it was from there, but we knew who caught it. We knew all the miles that it had on it. all the places that have been before it got back to the plate. And one of the things we really believe is sort of we can eliminate at least some of the carbon footprint by trying to sort of cut out the middleman, sell it to ourselves, and now that fish goes from, our dock to hopefully the local area, the local people. And that allows us also to be more adaptable in the face of climate change because we've really opened up the sort of avenues in which we can move our fish. We're not as reliant on sort of the traditional market system. Part of, the good thing about having the dual role is as a manager, as a council member, you see what's coming down the pike. When you're paying attention to it all year long, every day, it can get very disheartening and you can sort of, wonder what you're gonna have to also, 2 kids in college, how are we gonna make the future? But being able to be small and adaptable and nimble as a commercial fishing family has really worked for us. So hopefully that will continue to work as we see these species move around, which we are seeing.
Thank you. The next question I'd like to throw open to the panel. Sarah coordinates a campaign whose slogan is climate action led by people in boots, not people in suits. And it seems applicable to all of you. So maybe starting with you, Sarah, and just going down the line, could you each give just a couple minutes on, why you think your approach is effective and durable? What does that mean?
Yeah, so one of the criticisms that's often levied at the environmental movement and theories as why the movement hasn't been able to keep pace with the pace of environmental destruction is that it became professionalized, that environmental advocacy went from the communities inside the Beltway and environmentalism became a career rather than a cause. One thing I've learned in my own trajectory as a grassroots fisherman environmental leader is not to expect transformative change to be driven by people who are comfortable with the status quo. And unfortunately, people who are driving a salary and working inside a climate-controlled office building are not uncomfortable as a result of climate impacts themselves in the way that someone like a commercial fisherman is made uncomfortable. We derive our paychecks directly from Mother Nature. There's no buffer between the ocean's well-being and our own. And if we don't ensure that ocean ecosystems are treated well, we will see the effects of that negligence in our own survival. And that's why we've seen commercial fishermen over decades and decades rise to the challenge of defending ocean ecosystems, whether that's trying to prevent offshore oil and gas drilling, whether it's cleaning up oil spills when they unfortunately do occur, whether that's in the 20-plus year battle waged by the commercial fishermen, sports fishermen, and indigenous subsistence fishermen of Bristol Bay, Alaska, where I work in June and July, to protect the critical spawning, salmon spawning watersheds of Bristol Bay from industrial open pit mining, which resulted in the formal declaration of Clean Water Act protections by the EPA last year. Thank you, if there's anyone in this room, I think this building is actually EPA. Thank you, EPA. And it also is manifest, and I don't know if everyone completely understands or would agree with this, but it's also a drive to defend Mother Ocean that is manifest in the activism of many commercial fishermen to hold offshore wind development to the same standards of precaution that other areas of ocean conservation, including fisheries management, are held to. I find all of that incredibly inspiring and hope that my own career is a continuation of that legacy, and would love to see it go beyond fishermen to include other people in boots, and to see the emergence of a truly cross-sectoral, geographically diverse, multi-ethnic, multi-generation, multiracial groundswell of environmental and climate leadership by the working class. All people who wear boots, all people who work with their hands and their backs to provide food, housing, clothing, safety to the American public. So,
thanks, Sarah. Herb, do you still remember the question?
Probably the most transformative thing for me has been incorporating education in the transformation and the restoration of the local EO, the fish pond. Very early on in the process, I get a call from a local science high school teacher telling me that she's not reaching her kids teaching science in the high school. Can I bring them down to your pond and try to teach them science in a different way. And everything changed after that. 9 months later, we saw this amazing transformation in these high school kids. So we asked ourselves 3 questions. Can we duplicate this? Can we reach more kids? And imagine if we could actually provide them with an educational experience in the context of their own community that they could, that starts at kindergarten, what they would become by the time they became high schoolers. And we've been on this journey for the last 30 years, and it's been absolutely remarkable. We've been able to develop in those days, what we called culture-based education practices to teach all of the core areas of science, mathematics, social studies, and language arts. And they have become the stewards of change. So we talk about youth engagement and student voice and agency. I gotta tell you that, every opportunity that you have to engage children and youth, because with them come the families. And from the families come the influence in our education system. And from that comes the influence with our political leaders. And we have been on this journey for 30 years, and I tell you, it works. It works profoundly. And I gotta say, so this picture that you may see up here is an indication Waikalua Local E of the fish pond has become the PICO, or the hub for our organization. And as I said, in my opening comment, we lead with aloha in everything that we do. We could have led with fighting, people that were against us, that weren't like-minded with us, but we decided to lead with aloha, and that is primarily because of the kids. And we teach them this concept real simply, aloha aina to malama aina. How do you love the places in which you live, especially those places that nourish you? And if you can understand and have that empathy, again, I've heard many other speakers this week talk about developing empathy in our connection to Mother Earth, to places in which we live, then we'll be willing to do the hard work. And that's what we call in Hawaii, malama aina. That is to care for the places in which feed us. Thank you.
Carrie, on so boots not suits, be interested in your perspective, and I'm going to sneak in a question from someone who's asking how policymakers should address the shifting fish populations. So I don't know if you can hit both of those.
Well, I'll start with a quick anecdote about boots not suits. And a little personal story intertwined. Back in the 90s, marine protected areas were sort of a fairly new tool in the toolbox, at least in our area of the US waters. And a paper came out by some scientists, a great paper, but sort of suggested, 20% was the number of the ocean, which as we know now we're looking at 30. But I think maybe where things went off the rails a little is there were some swaths drawn on a map very early on off of our coast in that paper. And the fishermen, sort of the way it filtered to them, it felt very like they didn't have any voice in what was happening. And my first role as a fishery biologist was to sort of help the South Atlantic Council develop marine protected areas. And I met my husband because he was a commercial fisherman, and he showed up to the meeting with a large laminated NOAA chart. If anyone remembers, they don't use those anymore as much, but that's what they were using back then, and a pencil, and he drew boxes around areas that he thought should be protected as marine protected areas because they were some of his best fishing spots. He was unpopular for a little bit, but because he was a fisherman who suggested these areas, and other fishermen did as well, not just him, it was those fishermen that our constituents listened to. It was coming from them and not from top down. And as a result, we were able to implement marine protected areas. Now, what I hear from people is they love them, they edge fish them as sort of the science hoped would happen. And the preliminary science we're seeing out of there is they're great spawning grounds. So it's just an example of how really that bottom up, it was the fishermen who really needed to run that process, not the suits. And then I forget the second.
You know what,
you want to come back to it?
I'll come back to it. We have so many great questions from the audience. So, Rob, I'd like you to respond in part to one of the things Carrie said, which was, that it was other fishermen listening to fishermen when you talk about, how that might influence. And then my two-parter, but you've got to keep it
Okay, I
brief.
can remember this.
Is that, and because I think all of you, this is a good question for all of you, but it's if fisheries are required to make changes to meet climate policies, who should be responsible for financing those changes? So first part, influence, are you getting resistance
Okay.
from other folks? And then secondly, yeah.
Okay, so first part, I look at it now, which in the beginning, I don't like change myself, and this was hard to swallow, but like I said, instead of trying to fight something, learn something in front of mine, what do you do? You take your hat off, throw it in the sand, what do? You stomp it, get a dirty hat, kicking the can down the road, be resistant. You're gonna get nowhere. So we basically tried to dive in to say, what can we do with all best available science? And that's what we did just to start out with the reduced breaking strength and everything else. But one of the things I really like is it's education. I get a lot of guys that call me now up and down the coast from Mid-Atlantic or wherever, asking me questions on a lot of the gear modification that's been done to gear markings. And one of the cool things I do, not fishing, but in my other role, anything that comes off a marine mammal, large whale, I get to go through the gear to see if there's any identifying marks, buoys, numbers. So that is really cool in that one aspect. But if gear does come when I talk to fishermen, it's usually talking fishermen one-on-one, and I can't get off the phone with them. It's usually an hour or so, and I like doing it because I learn a lot, and we're talking the same language as somebody from an office who's never been on a boat or looked at this or looked at that through an office or online looking at something, but somebody who actually had some of the same experiences, talking the same lingo. And it's not a mediator, but we're talking one-on-one. And like I said, sometimes when I leave a message with somebody, like, they're not going to call me back. 5 minutes, I can't get off the phone with them. And on the way here at the airport the other day, there's a young fisherman, early 20s. He fished the closure this past year with on-demand gear. Real great kid, quiet, just wants to go fishing. He had a problem with something. He punched in the wrong password on the account to access his account. So he sent it to me. I'm like, whatever. We took care of it. He's like, yep, this is great. And one of the things, something came up. I go, yeah, hit that. And he's like, thank you. I'm going back fishing. I'm like, wow. He was happy. He actually got something done. And just talking to people one-on-one, when you know you did something that helped them and they're really happy, and which, oh, this is cool. I feel like I did something, especially younger people, because I was at 2020 in January at the first annual Gear Summit in Canada. I was asked to go speak on reduced breaking strength, and I'm like, yeah, okay, what am I going to talk about? So one of the tribal elders opened up the meeting, and everybody's going 100 miles an hour and everything, rushing around, doing whatever. And he goes, nobody stops and looks all the signs around you. And one thing I really took to heart, and I think about it all the time, it's, what are you doing? It's not 7 years, 7 months. What are you doing impacting right now that's going to impact 7 generations out down the road? And I thought that was really cool, and I really took that to heart. So everything I try to do, I'm trying to look at what's going to happen, like not 7 years, 10 years, I got a few years left fishing. Yeah, whatever, I just want to get through it. I don't want no change, but what are you doing for 7 generations out?
Rob,
what's going to affect that?
I love that. I'm going to, I'm going to save the financing part, which is a really great question, and we talked about yesterday when we met. And Herb, I think this is a nice follow-on. Here's a question for you. What lessons can we learn from Hawaiian fish ponds as we move forwards to grow the aquaculture sector as a food source?
Thank you for the question. So I've been at this for 30 years. Last year, we spent a year reflecting, what did we learn in the last 30 years? And more importantly, how can we take what we learned to inform us about how we approach the next 30 years? I love what Rob just said, because we subscribe to that. Our elders taught us the same thing. Think 7 generations. I still cannot wrap my head around that, but I can think in generations. So 2 things. The 2 takeaways was, every decision that you make, We are at a point in time in the history of the planet, we are beyond the point of no return. We live in the middle of the Pacific. We see it daily. Okay, if the ships and planes stop coming to our islands, there's less than 2 weeks' supply of food. It is absolutely fundamentally important and critical that we figure out ways to grow food again in our own home community. So 2 takeaways. Every decision that you make today, no matter how small, has to incorporate the impact of that decision on the next generation. We have to adopt that mindset. And the second one, and most importantly, is that we all have to take responsibility, because we live in a society that is overly dependent, and including myself, that we consume, we throw away, and we have lost the idea of trying to balance our innate gifts and talents that we all have, and that's why we're in this room, that we need to be a producer again instead of a consumer so much. Produce, and this is what I tell the kids, produce knowledge, produce food, produce music, produce art. Whatever gift and talent you have, produce something and be more aware of being a consumer and taking away and destroying some of the things that our ancestors have told us. My pond has become the bridge between indigenous wisdom and modern and contemporary science and technology. Why? Because we need all of it to be able to address the problems and the challenges that we have today. Simple as that.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Thank you. Okay, I've got, what would you say is the biggest challenge of being a fisherman?
We don't have enough time. I mean, I'm probably not going to say anything anyone hasn't heard, right? In our case, we're losing access to working waterfront. You know, I think what is an interesting situation that I've seen change over the 30 years I've been involved in this is it used to be regulations and management. At least in our area, that is not the biggest impediment to commercial fishing as it used to be. It is really now outside factors. It is, you know, for our shrimpers, it's imports. For us, it's access to waterfront. And then also the graying of the fleet. You know, getting new folks to come in is really, really challenging where we are. So it's very interesting to be in a position where we don't have the same gripe we used to. You know? And so for in our area, and I think it changes in every area, but in our area, that's what we experience.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. Sarah, do you want to comment? And do you feel like it's different when you fish in Alaska and when you fish in Rhode Island in terms of the hurdles you're facing?
Well, yeah, there are so many like practical, just, you know, challenges of being a fisherman, a lot of which is exactly what draws us to being a fisherman. I think the challenges we don't relish are the ones that relate to policy and governance, and, you know, a feeling that's widespread in the commercial fishing community of not being heard, not being seen, not being valued, not being seen as a source of solutions, which obviously this panel flies directly in the face of that. And I'm so glad, thankful to you again for showcasing this.
Thanks. Rob, do you want to address? Or I'll throw another one at you.
Okay, throw another one at me.
Okay. I think I want to go back to that, and you all may want to comment on it, because it's something I think a lot about, which was that question about when we're asking fisheries and the fishing businesses and the fishing communities to change due to ecosystem changes associated with climate change, who should finance that? Who should pay for ropeless gear? Who should pay for decarbonization? You know.
Well, as of right now, we don't want any, well, as I say, we, NOAA Science Center, we don't want guys
You're
buying.
complicated.
I'm complicated, I gotta wear. They don't want anybody purchasing gear, because this gear is being developed. We don't want you something that might be obsolete, you can't retrofit. This stuff is, I'm not gonna say, a lot of it's still in developmental phase, even the stuff that's being fished, enclosures, it's still gonna get made better, more of it. There's not enough gear there anyway, and I always say in a closed area, because that always seems to get lost in meetings in a crowd. Oh, it's be industry-wide. it's a tool in your toolbox for a closed area. But it's a lot of the NGO groups are buying this stuff, donating it to the gear cache. Like I said, we're training the guys to use it. If you want to, you don't have to use it if you don't want to. But it's expensive right now to retrofit your boat to go. Luckily, we're getting a lot of like donations and stuff like that. It's going through, even though it's buying gear, and a lot of the NGO groups are buying gear, going to the gear shed and doing this. And a lot of the major seafood buyers and players, when you hear all the MSC certifications on this, that, and sustainability, I always say, we were at meetings, somebody's complaining about this, put your money where your mouth is, take some of your investment, this is what you're doing to the fishery, buy some of this gear, put in this to get guys to go fishing, because my operating costs to do anything right now is just astronomically crazy. Something that was $100 is $1,000 in from bait. I used to get bait either free or $4, $12 a barrel. Now you're paying $250, $300 for a barrel of bait. Traps were used to build a lot of my own gear. It'd be like $40 for a trap, $50. This stuff's up to $200 a trap now, not including rope, just operating expenses and everything else. And to get crew. Luckily, I'm a fairly small boat, it's 40 feet. I have one guy that works with me, he's been with me for over 10 years. And Mark, who's here, Area 3 boat, he had to have a crew, and always chasing to get one extra guy to go fishing. We don't find guys who actually want to do this anymore, especially younger guys who try to get into it. It's hard work, and it's tough to get help. Yeah. Or you're always one man down, and it's tough.
Yeah. I'm going to we have so many good questions, so if you want to comment on any of the ones before, but I'm going to get back to one that I asked Carrie, but for anyone. And basically, this person wrote, with climate change, fish population responses will vary by species, by location. Some will respond well to marine heat waves, others will crash. Thinking about sablefish versus Pacific cod in Alaska as an example. So and again, I'll throw it to anyone, but how can managers and communities prepare for this kind of variability? What does precautionary management look like when you're dealing with a booming population of sort of climate change winners versus a population that's crashing? And I have my own thoughts, but I want to hear from all of you. I'm not going to call on anyone, but Herb, start.
Well, maybe I can. In Hawaii, in the days of old, we had a system called the kapu system. So to address that issue, you have to understand the cycle of fish, the harvesting time, how they spawn, and everything like that. And the kapu system was employed so that you would not take that fish during a certain spawning season, right? And so you have to really understand the ecology of the places and the communities in which you live and the kind of fish that are feeding you. And you have to employ these kind of management techniques to make sure that you have a symbiotic relationship with Mother Nature, and to be able to only take what you need, and to be able to leave so that the next time you come back, there's something going on there. Real quickly, I want to address the funding issue, because
thanks.
The funding issue is there's no one funder that's going to have all the money to be able to solve this. We're talking about a systemic change. We need everybody at the table, from the grassroots all the way up, to the highest levels. I've been coming to Washington, D.C. for 45 years now. I've gotten more than my fair share of federal monies, from NOAA, from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, EPA, U.S. DOE, NSF, blah, 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 all. And I thank them very much, because I see it as opportunities for us to move the needle more and more and more. But at the same time, I've also developed relationships, and I think that is the key word, is relationships, 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 with funders, with philanthropic funders, with state and local county governments. And now, for the very first time after 30 years, I see that everybody's beginning to move, cohesively in one direction, and that's where we need to be.
Yeah.
May I? Yeah, I think I'd be remiss to be in the Capitol and not mention that the important thing, I think, is going to be looking at how we deal with on the federal level, sort of changes to Magnuson. We need to be more adaptable. I mean, we are seeing we are bordered by, in the South Atlantic, by 2 regional fishery management councils. And as I said before, the fish don't stay in one area. And I think whether it's from state to state or council to council, we're going to have to find a way to be quickly adaptable. We're going to have to move from it being a big tanker ship that's really hard to steer to a little nimble speedboat, because that's how things are happening now. And we're going to need really good data. We're going to need better data collection programs and things like that, because that's where we're going to have to deal with these issues, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, excellent. That brings me to another question that was handed up here. And Sarah, you said we need to listen more to fishermen, fisherwomen, fishers in the indigenous communities for solutions. And I doubt anyone disagrees with that. But a question I got was, how do people who are not involved in fishing help achieve what you're all talking about?
Like what kind of people specifically? That's a large category. I mean,
Well, just think of everyone, and we've got virtual folks who's an audience who's not involved in fishing, but agrees with what they're hearing. How do they get involved?
Well, yeah, so I guess, like you said, it's not something that any one entity or constituency can do alone. There's sharing of knowledge, connections, relationships is really important. So I would say, just like Herb said earlier, relationships.
Janet, may I?
Yes, please.
Don't underestimate consumer pressure.
Great.
Please remember that we need some food security in the United States, and at the end of the day, seafood is a protein source that feeds a lot of our country. And so, at the very basis, if you are a consumer, ask questions, know where your seafood comes from, care about where your seafood comes from. If you can afford it, spend a little more on domestic U.S. seafood. You would be surprised at how much the consumer can actually play a huge role in this.
Fantastic. And one of the questions here is, how do we assist fishermen who would like to sell directly to consumers but face numerous barriers?
Yeah.
And maybe that's a topic for a further panel, unless someone wants to say something very succinct. But
there are lots of websites where you can put in, how to find local catch. Always do that. How about that?
Yeah. I just love these comments. Here's a person who starts out saying, fishing is vital. So glad we are discussing making it more environmentally sustainable. And that person's asking about, how does the fishing community help reduce plastics in the marine environment? Any last comments on that?
Plastics, everything we use in fishing basically is plastic. Nothing is all natural anymore. And one of the things I'm fortunate to do through one of the organizations on Cape, and there's a lot more, is marine debris. Marine debris is, you name it, a plastic cup, balloon, or lost fishing gear. So what I've done for the last, I think, 10 years, once a year, we go out, they try to find where a lot of this gear is, grapple it, get rid of it, and it was fishing for energy. There's a lot of different things going on, but that was one of the things. And I always, a friend of mine, she's like, balloons, she hates balloons. Graduation, the balloons, everybody lets the balloons off. So when I'm steaming home this time of year, what's that in the water? I see balloons. We go buy gaff and bring them home and get rid of them. What goes up comes down. They're plastic, they have strings, they are ingested by turtles, entanglements, especially, I'm not gonna go into detail, but sperm whales like squid.
What does a balloon look like?
What is balloon string? Pieces of cut rope, a red plastic cup floating. They eat that stuff. When it gets in their stomach, it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
They die. So it's...
Thanks, Rob. Listen, thank you all, Rob, Carrie, Herb, Sarah, for your wisdom and your experience, and for sharing it here today. There's other questions that are directed to each of you, so I would ask the audience, if you're in person, to seek out these incredible leaders and panelists and talk to them directly about some of the things you're curious about. So I'd like to, in a moment, first, I'd just like a round of applause for these 4 amazing people. So thank you all. Thank you, Joel and Shannon, the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, for including this panel in this important topic. And now it is my pleasure to close out this session. I'd like to turn it over to Aubrey Church, who's the Fisheries Policy Director for the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance, to close us out with some reflections looking forward. Aubrey.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I feel very honored to be up here with this great panel. So my name is Aubrey Church. I'm the Fisheries Policy Director at the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance, and I really appreciate today the opportunity to share my perspectives working alongside the commercial fishing industry. As we stand at the crossroads of our ocean's future, the urgency of our times is heightened by not only the media, but scientific studies, echoing an undeniable truth: our marine ecosystems are at risk. From the Bering Sea to the Pacific, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of Maine, the signs of change are unmistakable. Warming waters, shifting fish stocks, and fluctuations in our food webs are threatening the very foundation of our fisheries. Yesterday at the Conserve Leadership panel, we heard examples of what type of challenges we are facing for the ocean. Time. The actions we take now are going to have tremendous impact. We heard about the urgency of now. We can no longer wait. The status quo is just not an option. Loss of biodiversity, loss of way of life and culture, and a lack of connection from others outside this room or groups historically excluded. Yet amidst these challenges lies an opportunity, a chance to rise to the occasion and chart a new course toward sustainability and resilience. It's time to embrace an ecosystem approach to fisheries management, one that acknowledges the interconnectedness of our actions and their impact on the health of our oceans. Adaptability and resilience must become the hallmarks of our fisheries management strategies. We must empower fishing communities to weather the storms of climate change and provide them with the tools and resources they need to thrive in the face of uncertainty. This means investing in collaborative research and working closely with the fishing industry, innovative technologies, sustainable fishing practices, and resilient working waterfront infrastructure that can withstand the challenges ahead. We know that fishermen are stewards of the marine resource and care deeply about protecting it. I always say that they are scientists witnessing on the water daily what is happening. They always want to rise to the challenge to tackle climate change. Our journey towards a sustainable future will not be easy. It will require bold leadership and unwavering commitment from all of us here. We must challenge the status quo, pushing for more equitable and inclusive approaches to governance that prioritize the needs of both people and the planet. One of the most powerful messages yesterday was, don't go from frustrated to disengaged. Let's remember action leads to change. We heard today from panel leaders in their communities that were challenging the status quo. Climate-ready fisheries management and climate-resilient fisheries must require more timely and responsible fisheries management. It requires that we respond to an influx of new species into our waters while considering the loss of others, and requires that we set dynamic and new management targets. It's time we take up the charge. We no longer can wait. Fishing access is paramount in our communities. So as we navigate the waters ahead, let us remember that the decisions we make today will shape the future of our oceans for generations to come. Let us stand together, united in our resolve to strengthen our blue economy that is not only prosperous, but also sustainable and resilient. The time for action is now, and together we can ensure that our oceans remain a source of abundance and wonder for centuries of young men and women to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you, Aubrey. That was a very powerful closing statement here. Thank you to our moderator, Janet, for your leadership. Thank you to this distinguished group of panelists. That was a very powerful conversation and much needed. So I just want to acknowledge and echo something that was said, is that there's no one funder that's going to solve this. It's going to take systems change. And I think with this conversation here, we heard a lot of inspiration that will deliver on that. So thank you to all of you in the audience who have been posting and sharing the information about this incredible panel, as well as your comments and pictures. Keep that up. We are going to be taking a break now for lunch, and we will be back at 1:15. So thank you all. And once again, please, a round of applause for our panel.
Well,
It's going so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.